Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our May Schools Forum meeting. Just a reminder to everyone, if you could please keep your cameras turned off unless you are either presenting a paper or making a point or asking a question. Thank you. John, for some reason, I've got a white picture for you, but you've popped up, so I'm not quite sure what's happening with your camera. So welcome everybody to today's meeting. We have had apologies from Robert Lenko, Wendy James and Maria Kemble. The people who are present this morning are myself, Alison Coleman, your chair, as well as Adrian Orr, Amanda Havers, Andrew Berry, Andrew Reid, Angelo Guiducci, Anne-Marie Price, Christina Lewis, Colin Shaw, Daniel Jones, Debbie Richards, Gordon Jones, Gemma Morgan, John Tunnelly, Jacqueline Dyer, Michael Quinton, Ashley Jacobs, Paul Firkin, Rowena Mackey and Ros Somerville. So welcome everyone to today's meeting. Could I just ask, does anybody have any declaration of interest that they would like to notify us about for items on today's agenda? Gordon, your hand is up. I'll come to you first. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I believe I should declare an interest on paper C as a trustee, director of Unity Schools Partnership with special responsibility for SEND. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Gordon. Okay, so we now move on to the next item on our agenda, which is our paper A, the minutes of our last meeting that was held on the 18th of January. Could I please take it for accuracy and matters arising page by page, please? Page 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5. Page 6. Mike, there was an action for you. Could you give us an update, please?
Hi, Alison. Yeah, morning, everybody. I have followed up with the infrastructure team this week after catching up with Alison, Adrian and Sonia. They are still working on the data. So I have asked for the data for as far as it will go for pupil projections, and I've also asked for some graphical representation as well. So I think that would be helpful. So as soon as I have that, I will share it with the forum group.
Super. Thanks for that update, Mike. Thank you. So moving on, we're now on page 7 and 8. And I don't see any other hands up, so thank you. I'll take that as that we can note that as an accurate reflection of our last meeting. Thank you. So we now move on to not paper B, but the next item, which is a verbal update from Sonia on DSG outturn. Could I just ask everyone, whether you're presenting or making a point or asking a question, because we have 1 or 2 new people with us today, could you just introduce yourselves, please, when you start? Thank you. Sonia, over to you.
Good morning, everybody. For those who don't know me, my name is Sonia Harbin. I'm the CIP Strategic Finance Partner, looking after all of children, young people services within Suffolk. So I work with a fabulous team, which includes Mike Quinton, who is the absolute guru on anything technical. But I'm just going to give a very quick update on the DSG outturn. Obviously, the year-end finishes on the 31st of March, so I just didn't have time to prepare. So I don't want to go into too much detail because I don't want to steal Gemma's thunder, because I know that Gemma's put a lot of work into just the send element of it. But overall, there was an overspend of 26.5 million on the DSG in 23-24, of which actually sort of 27.7 million was against the high needs block. So it was actually surplus against the schools block, which was mainly about reduced school growth compared to what was budgeted for, and just a difference to the rates that was expected in recoupment. What it does mean is that the overall DSG reserve is now in a deficit position of 54.1 million. And whilst there is still currently a statutory override in place, which sort of means that the local authority doesn't have to account for that deficit in its main accounts, it holds them separately. It does impact, obviously, on the cash flow of the council, and it does impact on our ability to, in effect, it means we have to borrow more money for things like capital, because we have to hold cash to offset that deficit. So it does come at a cost. It does come at a cost to the council, which obviously is a concern for us, and we're working through ways of how we will support that deficit at the moment. So, as I said, yes, we will do a full report ready to come in July, where actually Mike will be presenting, because I will be away on leave then. I don't think there's anything more, unless there's any questions that people have got that I can answer. Andrew.
Yes, good morning. Hello, and I'm Andrew Reid, and I'm the Suffolk County Council Cabinet Member for Education and SEND. Sonia, that's helpful. I have seen a forward-looking graph about the predicted rise in the deficit. Is it worth just saying a few things about that?
I can do to say that at the moment, where the position that we're in is that, and Schools Forum know all this, or those of you who've been on a long time, it's not that our SEND service is massively overspending comparatively to our other sort of statistical neighbours and our regional neighbours. It's our funding that is just so low in comparison, particularly around what is as part of the high needs block funding formula. There's an element that is for historical. It's based so about, it used to be 32.5% of the national high needs block budget was based on basically the comparative amount that authority spent on SEND back in 17-18. That percentage is reducing. So what they are doing, the DfE, is they are making it more on evidential factors and less on what you spent in 17-18, when what Suffolk was doing was trying to compress our spend to try to remain within budgets, because that was the right thing to do, thought to be at the time. So what we're actually doing, we're in this catch-up position now, where actually we're looking at making sure that we're sort of providing the services that our children need where we can. That comes at additional cost, and it's actually our funding that's not keeping pace with that. So even in this financial year, I think our additional income that we're getting in 24-25 is about 7 million. Well, as you can see, when we've overspent by 27 million in a year, and those costs are not going down. So we're looking, you know, we're guaranteed to have an even bigger overspend in 24-25.
Thank you, Sonia, and I know there'll be more detail in your paper next time.
Yeah.
And Gemma, I know you'll be coming along in a minute, and you're always updating us on the position as well, because you look forward as well as backward in the work that you do and share with us. So thank you both. Very difficult as ever, but yes, well, unless we get more funding, we haven't got a way out of it. That's the bottom line. Isn't it?
We haven't. Gordon's got his hand up.
He has, yes. Gordon, I come to you now. Thank you.
Okay, well, I was going to raise this point under the next paper, because I think it was more relevant. But I mean, the simple fact is, to my mind, that there hasn't been enough money in the high needs system since, and probably before, the Act, which was 10 years ago. And whilst there is significant increase in demand, without any additional money from some central government, it will not be resolved. And actually, the forecasts, the overspend is off balance sheet at the moment. If it comes in, if there's a change in government and it comes in on balance sheet, that bankrupts the county council and many others. And as you say, I mean, the funding shouldn't be based on on historical funding. It should be based upon current demand, and until that is addressed, it will not change. And the Schools Forum, as many others, will be in the position that we're in, and so I'll probably pick it up again. But that's, to me, That's the black and white of the situation.
Yes, we're hamstrung by those facts, aren't we, Gordon? I think you were probably also on Schools Forum back in 2017-18, as was I, when we were patting ourselves on the back for setting a balanced budget, and it's come back to bite us ever since. I'm afraid.
Well, balanced budgets can come back to bite you, can't they?
Yeah, indeed. Okay. Is there any other points anybody would like to raise about this paper? Otherwise, we'll move on. John, I don't know if you can have another go at just putting yourself so you're not on camera, because you're just appearing as a white square. I don't know whether you've got your camera blocked off, but still got camera on, if you know what I mean. I'll leave you to have a look at it if you can, but otherwise, never mind, we'll carry on anyway. So now moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is high needs funding, paper B. So Gemma, over to you to elaborate further on the position. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Good morning, everybody. And for those of you who don't know me, my name's Gemma Morgan, and I'm the head of SEND funding and provider services, part of the inclusion service here at Suffolk County Council. So I've got two papers. The first one is an information paper. So what I'm going to do is just run through some highlights from this paper. And then obviously if you've got any questions, then by all means, put your hands up, put some stuff in the chat, whichever suits you best. So obviously Sonia's just talked about the overspend for the DSG, and my paper looks at the high needs block, which is an element of that. The first section of the paper talks about the end of year position for 23-24, and you'll see that we spent an additional 27 million on top of what we'd spent last year. The majority of that was on independent settings, bespoke settings, and also top-up funding for newly created places, as well as additional requests for funding, which I'll touch on a little bit more in more detail as we go through the paper. So the independent placements become, we're using them more than we have done in the past, but that's because our demand has increased. We do try and manage those fees that we pay for those independent schools as much as we can. We have a fee increase process, which happens on a monthly basis. And we also work with our neighbouring and statistic local authorities to look at how we can best manage the costs of our placements at the independent settings. Obviously, as you've known from previous documents that I've sent to this group before, we're looking at a 23% rise in the demand in SEND over the next 3 to 5 years, and we're not seeing that dipping at all. So what we've done is we've done some work on the next financial year, so this current financial year that we're now in, so 24-25, and working on predictions based on children who are already in the system, who we expect to come through the system, work on the percentage trajectories as well based on what we know from what we've done in the past. Then we are also looking at spending more than we spent last year. So we spent approximately 120 million last year, and this year we're predicting 148 million. We are looking at a 48.5 million pounds overspend at the end of the current financial year, which will take our overall deficit to over, I think we'll just then tip over the 100 million. Sonia, as Sonia mentioned, and as Gordon eloquently said, we are underfunded as a local authority. We aren't, we're not different to our neighbouring or statistical at local authorities. We just haven't had that funding that we've needed since in the system for many, many years. I also put in the paper some detail about the number of children we're supporting, because I thought that was useful for you to see the increase in year on year of how many children we're supporting. Obviously, this means there are more children in education. And that means that we're able to better meet their needs and obviously support them in the varying different settings. We've created 741 new places in the last 3 years. This has been most of that has been due to the Send Capital programme, where we've invested where the local authority has vested capital funding in creating new places. but we've also created spaces within our existing establishment as well. So where a school have said they could put more children in each class or could use some space differently within their buildings, then we've been obviously working with them to make that work. And what we've got we have set up quite a few mainstream schools who have seen a drop in their admissions are then looking to support us by offering a classroom for SEND provision within some of their schools. And we've been working with Unity in particular, who have been able to identify a couple of schools who are able to do that. So that obviously gives us additional SEND spaces. So similar to our units, but classrooms based within the mainstream schools. So over the last 4 years, the number of children receiving high needs funding has increased by 56%, and our funding has increased by approximately 11. So there is a big gap there between what we've been getting from the DFE in comparison to what we're spending. I also put in there the increase in what we're spending on independent and bespoke provision. We are, year on year, we're spending more, and also the table just demonstrates that we've got many more children in those settings, hence the cost, but also the provision is more costly than it's ever been. And the independent settings, they have more, we have less, we struggle to negotiate with them as well as we can with the schools that are in our local offer. They set their prices, they dictate the market. So we are in a very, we are held in a difficult position, more so with our independent settings. We aren't, in honesty, we're not going to see that number go down, but what we need to do is work on trying so it doesn't go up too much more. Okay, so the other thing that I promised at the last meeting was an analysis of our autumn term high needs top-up funding. So we have a moderation process every term. So what I've done is I've compared autumn terms from previous years to see the increase. And you'll see from the table in paragraph 27 on page 6 that we saw a 26% increase from autumn 22 to autumn 23. What I try and do is compare the like for like terms, because obviously summer's usually our quietest term because most children are settled and there's not as much movement, and autumn is by far our busiest term. Someone did mention in a previous meeting about looking at whether the level of banding has changed. So in the table in paragraph 28, I actually looked over the last 4 years as to whether we've had more requests for higher bands, but actually we haven't. We've had more requests for bands, but the percentage split and the table in paragraph 28, actually, it couldn't be more demonstrative of the fact that we aren't seeing, the schools aren't putting in higher band requests. It's just more children needing high needs funding. Okay, so I can see no hands and I can't see anything in the chat. So I'm going to move on to the deficit recovery plan. Now, this is an attachment to this document. However, it hasn't been updated prior to this meeting. And the reason for that is because we need to go through the next paper and the voting before I then want to update a document that we're going to share with the DFE. But it's an ongoing document that we continue to update, and I work with Sonia and Mike to make sure that that's accurate. And we talked at the last meeting. I mean, I know, Gordon, you made a comment. This is supposed to be a recovery plan. At the moment, it's an example of our forecasting continued deficit. It's not about us recovering that funding, and we have fed that back to the DFE. Okie dokie, right. So the last part of my first paper was about mitigation, and again, that was raised at one of these meetings previously around what are we doing to mitigate the overspend. So I worked with the High Needs Working Group, so that's a subgroup of this meeting, so a subgroup of Schools Forum, and I took away their thoughts on what could make a difference. And I've written in the paper what they raised. So we had the tribunal system, quality of EHCPs, early intervention, special educational services training, capital investment, and good practice. And what I've tried to do is in the paper is write what work we've started to do to meet some of those areas, because as you'll probably know, a lot of them were picked up as part of our Ofsted inspection that we had at the end of last year. So that's ongoing work across the whole of the inclusion service. Okay, so that is a quick overview of my paper. I can see that Gordon, you've got your hand up. Thank you, Alison.
Yes, this is not a question, it's just a statement. I just want to make reference to the sort of special needs units in mainstream schools and how successful I think they have been, not only in providing the right provision for the appropriate individuals, but I think it's been good for the schools, certainly been good for the county, and provided the right provision at less cost all round. So even like congratulations for the work that that you've done. Okay.
Thank you, Gordon. And it is really down to those trusts and the schools that we're working with to make these units successful. And many of you are on this call who are involved in those units. And it was something new to Suffolk when we introduced them as part of the Send Capital programme. And they have been successful, and we are very, as a local authority, we are very grateful to all of the trusts and schools who are hosting one of our units. So thank you very much.
Sue has got her hand up. Sue Prickett, over to you.
Good morning. I'm Sue Prickett. I'm the Chief Finance and Operations Officer at SENDAT, and we sit on the High Needs Working Group with Gemma. I can commend Gemma and her team for the work that is being done in high needs, and this paper is really effective. Thank you. There's a lot of really useful data there. Can I just check if the information released by CST recently, the Confederation of Schools Trust, implied that the high needs funding was increased by 4.3% overall by central government, and that local authorities would receive a minimum of 3% per head of the population aged 2 to 18. Is the team able to quantify the amount that we've received, not necessarily in this meeting, is closer to the 4.3% than the 3%? Because the funding, looking at your table, Gemma, in table 21, it's as though we've only received a 1% increase in the high needs block from 23 to 24, and central government is assuring us that it's going up by a minimum of 3%. And then what impact does that have on your next paper that's coming up?
So I'm going to ask Mike to come in on this one, because I think the figures that I've quoted in table 21 are the high needs block increases over the last 3 years, but they are, yeah, no, you're right, the 22, 23 to 23, 24 is only 1%, isn't it? So it may be that I just need to go and check those outside of the meeting.
Shall I just come in here, Gemma? Because I think what those figures are on your table as well. They're just the element that comes into Suffolk. They don't include the recruitment element that goes to academies. So obviously, where we then have academy conversions, that amount of money goes up. So in effect, I think it's now about 26 million that goes out directly. So I think what we could do, Sue, is just do 2 lines, do the bit that remains within the authority, and then add on the recruitment element. I know Mike's got his hand up now. He's much better than me, so I'm sure he might be able to add to that as well.
Yeah, and then just the lobbying that goes behind your data. What is the mechanism that says to the government that, you know, apparently you're only giving us a 1% increase year on year, and yet our spending is increasing by more than that, by 11%. Sorry, Mike, I interrupted you.
That's fine. Hi, Sue. I'll come in on the increase first. I was just scrabbling around while Sonia came in, thankfully, just to fill. So the increase that we had, and Sonia was right, so we get the whole quantum of funding for Suffolk includes all of the funding that goes direct to academies. So we had 107 million in 23-24, and that went up to 130, or just under 114 million in 24-25. So it's a 6.3% increase for Suffolk. So, you know, that is a slightly different from what Gemma's got. And then on the lobbying front, I will let others come in for that question.
So sorry, just to add to what Mark said, sorry, the figures that I've used are like Sonia said, they're after the academies and all the funding for the units and things that have come off our budget. So there's two lots of funding that we look at, but we can make sure that that's included in the next paper.
Great, thank you. Sue, have you completed your questions now? In which case I'll move on to Stephen. Sorry, Ros, I think Stephen was next with his hand up. I'll go to him first, thank you.
Thank you. Stephen Dewing, I'm Chief Financial Officer for Sapientia Education Trust and also Seckford Education Trust. It was just off the back of the point that Gordon made about the SRB units and the success of those. I think they have been really beneficial. As I know we've discussed, Gemma, we as a trust that operate, I think 5 of them, have concerns about the sustainability of them at the moment, and that model needs looking at to ensure it works for the trust providing as well. Because we need to keep it running.
And there are conversations that we're having already with the trust regarding those units. So that's something that Ros Somerville and I are aware of, and are meeting with well, yourselves and obviously your CEO to discuss those concerns that you have.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.
Sorry, Ros, I hadn't realised you were trying to hop in on the last point, so apologies for cutting you off. You're on mute, Ros.
That's absolutely fine. Thank you very much, Alison. I'm Ros Somerville. I'm Assistant Director Inclusion, work very closely with Gemma. And yes, absolutely, we're looking, obviously, working with trusts around sustainability. Just in answer to Sue's questions about lobbying, and I'm sure Councillor Reid and Councillor Richard will come in if as required, that we do lobby as a local authority. Certainly councillors pick that up, have done historically and continue to do so. We're part of the F40 group of local authorities who are the lowest funded across the country, and there's a collective work with that group, as well as direct work through Suffolk councillors and indeed Suffolk MPs who have sat at debates. And Matt Hancock, for instance, there was a specific debate about SEND and funding in the House of the Parliament, and he spoke on behalf of Suffolk and generally representing the situation for those lower funded local authorities. So the work happens, Sue, and at every opportunity when we are meeting with the DFE, we will raise it. We are part of the Delivering Better Value programme, which is a consequence of our overspend in our DSG, and those conversations are going on all the time.
Thank you, Ros. Adrian, you're next. Thank you.
Thanks very much. My name's Adrian Orr, Assistant Director, Education, Skills and Learning. I'm just going to build on the comments that Ros made about lobbying. We are relentless around the lobbying, and we're becoming progressively more sophisticated in that lobbying too. The key issue, as described by Gemma, is that historic factor. So broadly, we support the notion of a national funding formula. Our challenge is that the mechanism that the DFE are putting in place to level up that formula will take too long in Suffolk. So we are challenging very specifically around that formula element being changed, rather than just saying there isn't enough money. We're actually giving the rationale, and several people in this virtual meeting I know have been involved directly. Indeed, Gordon, you and I have sat with the previous school minister in their office challenging them on this very issue. But similarly, and I'm sure Councillor Reid will come in on this, we have, as recently as 2 weeks ago, written to all Suffolk MPs encouraging them to engage in the F40 activity that was happening in Westminster in the last fortnight. And I know there's ongoing discussions with the MPs around how we can get some change in that element of the formula, that element of NFF that actually is fairly negative to shire authorities generally. And there is some, that there is a sort of collaborative and a collective approach from a number of shires to challenge that. So I won't say any more than that because I know others will want to come in. Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Reid, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Yes, and I'm really just coming in behind Ros and Adrian's comments. And yes, I wrote to all of the MPs a few weeks ago, as Adrian says. and I've got a briefing meeting with the chair of F40 and the head of administration. So the chair is Alex Dale. I've got a briefing with him on Monday, this coming Monday, with regards to activities, and I will be joining the executive committee for that. And really, you know, summed up by Peter Aldous at the last briefing for MPs at the end of April, towards the end of April, where he said, well, you know, it's all very well talking about the distribution of the cake, but we also need a larger cake. And he's been at this for a long time, 14 years. He says the battle goes on, but I want to join the battle and make sure that we press the case for Suffolk.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. It would be nice to think that we'll make some progress at some point. Let's just keep our fingers crossed. Gordon, over to you.
Yeah, as a former member of the executive committee of the F40 group, I feel I should just come in that we've got to start doing something different and something new, you know, to get our voice really heard and to be effective, because we seem to be doing the same things as we've always done, and unfortunately getting the same results as which is perhaps not surprising. I don't want to go.
I'll happily come and talk to you, Gordon, after I've talked to Alex Dale.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to that.
Thank you.
I'll shut up now. I won't get political.
I think as many conversations as possible in this space are all welcome. Wherever and whenever. Thank you. Susan, your hand is up next. Thank you.
Hi, yeah, covering for Robert Lenko today, Susan Shields, Governor at Thurston Community College. Just trying to understand, looking at the budgets, why you've got 2023-24 budget of 89 million, forecast of 120, but then the budget for 24-25 is over only 100 million and forecasts already 148. Why are the budgets set so low?
So the budgets they're not set at that amount. That's the amount that we get in from so we've got core budget and we've also got our high needs budget.
Right. So this is the funding rather than the actual budget.
This is the funding, yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Terminology. Right.
But
okay. Thank you.
To indicate how much gap there is between the funding that's allocated to us and what actual need is.
I work for an insurance company and the budget is what we're expecting to spend. So yeah, confusion around terminology. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Schools funding terminology is a whole ball game all on its own.
Thank you, Susan.
It's messed with many a mind over the years, I can promise you.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for contributing to the conversation around that paper. That's been really helpful. Gemma, shall we move on to your next paper now, paper C? Thank you.
Yes, please. Thank you so much. Okay, so paper C is a voting paper, and there were two asks within this paper. So the proposal is for the first half of the paper is to increase the top-up bands across the board by 3%. Slightly tweaked 3%, slightly over 3%, so that the amounts aren't sort of like 99 pence and things like that. So what the proposal is for today, and I appreciate that this is a long time coming, and I also appreciate that this is not enough, and that many people in this meeting would want to lobby for more. But obviously, in the light of our financial situation, what the proposal is we increase the budget by 3% for all top-up funding. So that would include early years, FE. It will also include our AP funding. So what I've done is I've tried to break down on the tables how much it's going to cost, and if we go for the 3%, it will be an increase of 1.641 million on our overspend, and that is included in the first paper, because I had to decide whether to show it with or without. So I thought I'd show it with, so we've got the worst case scenario. So for the first section of the paper, the question is to ask Forum to vote on agreeing that 3% increase. So I think I'm going to hand over to Teresa for that, am I?
Well, I think it's a straightforward. I'll just see if anybody's got any questions.
Yeah, of course.
And then I'll organise the vote in a minute, Gemma. That's all fine.
Thank
but
you.
We can see if there's any comments people want to have a conversation about this before we go to the vote. So Stephen, you've got your hand up. Thank you.
It was two questions, actually. The first, given the scale of the deficit, are we allowed to do this? Where does the money come from? Is it?
It's added to our overspend, Stephen. The money doesn't come from anywhere. It's added to our. So that's why it has to come here for a decision, because the decision is if we give any more money for top-up funding, it's overspend. There's no money.
It feels a bit of an odd decision asking us, because I mean, yes, I want more money in my schools, absolutely, but there's no consequence or understanding of the other side, really. Why not put 5%, 10%? It just feels like, yeah, there isn't control of this.
So
which feels a bit dangerous.
I don't know if Ros has got her hand up to come in on this, Alison. I know Gordon is.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I am putting my hand up to come in on this. Absolutely, Stephen, I totally understand that position. And obviously, it is a challenging situation. And the reality is that there is a recognition that our banding hasn't gone up. There is a statutory duty on the local authority to secure the provision that is held in education, health and care, and set out in education, health and care plans. And if we continue to underfund schools to do that, then we aren't supporting that statutory, we're not fulfilling that requirement. And we know from feedback from schools, individual feedback from schools, that this is becoming a big issue. We also know that mainstream schools not being able to support children, fulfil the provision in an EHCP, means that we are then looking for much more expensive provision elsewhere, which would also come out of this budget. So in many ways, rather than addressing this issue at an individual school level or trust level every time people come back to us, we are looking to come to Forum to say, well, would this be a good investment of money here, which we can understand how much that is, because there is the correlational potential savings of keeping more children within their mainstream settings and therefore offsetting additional costs in other schools that cost way more. Obviously, only for those children who can have their needs met in mainstream. I'm not suggesting we're artificially trying to adjust that. It's just the recognition this funding hasn't gone up over such a considerable period of time, and that schools are now bumping into that issue, which if we ignore it collectively, we will still have to address it individually. It won't stop costing us money, is what I'm saying.
And then that flows nicely into my second point, if I may, which is from our trust position and a couple of others I've spoken to, actually, we'd be interested in the money being flowed towards the higher bands rather than spread evenly, because we feel the pressure at the top of the bands most. That is where the problem, on the current rate of 13,000, and we're having to put a TA kind of full time, which costs 25 grand. That's where we feel the biggest challenge. So actually, rather than spreading it across all, let's weight it towards the top where it can have the biggest impact and actually prevent, as you say, the escalation up through need. And that's a conversation I'm having with another LA, because I think that's important that we look at that model, because it helps meet the needs of what we're trying to do.
Ros, did you want to come back on that?
Well, yes, I mean, that's a really interesting approach. And I suppose the question is today to the forum what's been presented, and that you've added that to the mix. That isn't part of what we will be voting on today. What I would say is that the bands are needs led. So when the child's needs are identified, that aligns to a type of a level of band, and that banding should indicate how much TA support is needed in order to deliver the provision as set out in the plan. It isn't about saying whether a child needs full-time or not full-time. It's how much adult support does the child need in order to implement the interventions and support as outlined in the plan. So we need to ensure that we are maintaining that approach and not just saying how many hours a child needs, because we know categorically from all the research out there that just putting another adult next to a child actually is detrimental to their educational outcomes. Blatchford's work at the Institute of Education was unequivocal with that. So we have to ensure that we know exactly what that adult will be doing with the child that's evidence-based and will make a difference. And that's what the plan should set out. So I'm interested in your suggestion, and that might be something that the forum would like to discuss, and might be reflected in the votes if that's a direction of travel, and we would be open to reviewing that together. I'm just making the point that it is about provision in plans, which sets out what the adult will be doing, not necessarily the number of hours in isolation.
Thank you, Ros. Just going back to previous points about funding, Mike has put in the chat, and I'll just read it out. The DfE are looking at place funding, which hasn't been changed since 2013, which would then possibly mitigate these types of asks that LAs are asking forums to do. So although we might be recognising that if we do vote in favour of the increase as suggested by Gemma this morning, it might be mitigated by changes in funding that the DfE are looking at. But we do have to recognise, I think, that we've had many conversations at this group over probably the last 2-3 years that has regularly come up about the fact that the amount per band hasn't changed for such a long time. So I know that's where the thinking for this need came through. But I'll now go round other people who want to come in. Gordon, I'll come to you first. Thank you.
Thank you. I was going to ask two questions, one of which was how you got to the 3%, but that's really already been answered in that, you know, that's just a sort of balanced opinion view, and welcome for any increase. But the second one was why the review date in 3 years time? Should it not be constantly under review?
That's also a very good question. I think it was ensuring that we didn't make a promise to review it year on year when we don't obviously know what our financial situation will be. So it was a case of having a point of time to review it, which was 3 years' time. However, we can bring that forward if that's what forum would like us to do. I think it was just not to make a promise, Gordon, that we could put up by another 1.6 million next year and then the year after, because it still is a considerable amount of money from adding to the deficit.
I fully understand and accept that, but there should be a mechanism. I'm sure there is, that you know, our concerns, you know, are, and there's an option to review on as a need basis. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Take that point, Gordon. Sue, you're next again. Thank you.
My point was similar to Gordon's, actually, just that I think there should be evidenced review annually, even though it's not necessarily a guarantee of increase. And also just a point of almost concern regarding Mike's DfE place funding, and I also had been part of a roundtable event with David Widdy when he talked about the increase in place funding, and I welcome that, but I am also very cautious of it, that it doesn't actually reduce the amount that local authorities receive for high needs just by increasing the place funding that is being received if and when that comes to special schools. So I think we do need to be very aware that by increasing the place funding, the government are not abdicating responsibility for increasing high needs in order to mitigate what we're getting place funding wise.
That's helpful clarification. Thank you, Sue. Okay, Gemma, you haven't got anything to add to that, so I'll move on to Andrew. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Andrew Bray, CEO of Tillian. Gemma, did we get an answer to Stephen's question about why 3% was chosen? And second part of that is, how does that compare with other local authorities and what they're doing?
So other local authorities have different banding systems, Andrew, so it's very difficult to compare like for like. Obviously we do talk to our other neighbouring and statistical local authorities to see what they are doing. Some aren't doing anything at all. Others are doing a percentage increase anywhere between 1% and 5%, depending on their deficit position. But the problem is everybody's got different deficit position, particularly those of ours who are our statistical neighbours. So that is, I mean, so we have spoken with them, and like I say, there's different arrangements in each local authority. The reason for 3% was because we've been looking at, we were given a 3% increase we've been passing on a 3% to our schools as part of their place funding increase, part of the special schools. And it was I want to say affordability. It's not affordable, Andrew, whatever we choose because of the situation with our overspend. But it felt that 3% would go some way towards making a difference for our schools and putting more money into the system. And final question, what's the impact on schools of doing this, or what's the impact on the local authority of doing this, making this decision? When you say impact, what it will mean was from September 24, any requests for bandings will be in line with the new values. So there'll be from autumn term, I should say, there will be an increase in funding for schools, and that will happen as soon as the payments are made following the autumn term moderation. Yeah, sorry, Gemma, I was talking specifically on bigger finance. What are the impacts? What is the impact on school budgets of doing this? Because it's within the budget. It doesn't look like there's any impact, but I just want you to clarify that. And the impact on the local authority, obviously there is more deficit. So what is the likely impact on the local authority? Sorry if I wasn't clear. No, I think I'm probably getting confused with the question, Andrew. I do apologise. So Sonia's got her hand up. Maybe she can answer this a little bit more. It's more straightforward than I can.
Yeah, I think the problem is with an increasing deficit, as I said earlier, we don't have Suffolk, whilst there's a lot of local authorities in the same position in terms of their DSG deficit, and ours isn't the highest, obviously, but other authorities will have bigger general reserves than we have that can cover those. Suffolk are not in that position. So as the deficit increases, it does put an increasing pressure on our revenue budget to fund more for our capital schemes that have already got agreed, and that's all of our capital. So building schools or building, even the SEND capital programme, everything is dependent. Then we have to borrow more, so that costs us more, because obviously, as you know, borrowing costs money. So it does have, so that's why in terms of putting in additional this 3%, it's a really pragmatic decision that isn't just made in its own within the SEND team. This has been discussed with our Section 151 officer, because that's where the impact is. So it's about getting that real balance about what we need to do to ensure that the service, as Ros was saying, can continue to meet our statutory requirement in terms of that, but actually being really honest and practical about what our financial position is as an authority, which is not great, and it's not a secret in terms of where we're at. So I think that is the difference. I think if Suffolk were in a position where we had a lot more reserves, that we could cover it, I think the conversations might be different, but Suffolk is in this point where, as Gordon said, we can't afford, if the statutory override goes, we've got a serious problem in Suffolk, and what that then means for not just SEND but everybody in terms of commissioners coming in. We're not that position just yet. I don't want to scaremonger, but we aren't in the same position as other authorities who have got similar levels of deficit. They've got reserves to cover that. So having an increasing deficit won't impact on their revenue as much, because they won't have to necessarily increase their borrowing to fund their capital programmes in the same way that we do. Does that make sense, Andrew?
It does, but I suppose that raises the question that if you don't have the revenue to cover these deficits year on year, what is the long-term impact? Because the funding can't be covered. Does this mean that there is a danger that the local authority will be put into the category, whatever, I can't remember what the category is, but we don't want another Birmingham, do we?
No, and I think you'll be very well aware of, you know, the narrative behind, you know, that it's not just poorly run authorities that are now heading into financial difficulties. It's very well run authorities that are heading into those difficulties, and that's where Suffolk sits in. As I said, we're not alone. We're not, you know, we it's just our levels of reserves. So I think that's the position we're in. So we can't, whereas, you know, 3-4 years ago, we would have been able to have these discussions without as much input from our Section 151. I'm just not in that position. So I'm line managed by a Section 151. So Lou's very much aware of what we're doing and those, you know, conversations. And Andrew will be very aware, Councillor Reid will be very aware of those conversations as well, in terms of what the impact is. And you're absolutely right. There's going to come a point, if that statutory override goes, you know, we won't be the only authority in that position, that's what I'd say. But Sonia, we would be in a...
Councillor Reid has his hand up, so I'll let him come in. And Sonia,
yes,
can you send you to the chat to read a question from Susan and then come back on that, please?
Yes, thank you, Alison. Yeah, and just to really compound what Sonia's saying, this is very much of a structural issue in terms of our financial position. It's a balance as to how we do things going forward, taking everything in the round, and it does impact the entire local authority. But this is a systemic issue, and it is a problem that that every local authority with responsibility for this faces to a greater or lesser degree. And I would say this, that I think that Suffolk has had over the last 2 years a fairly, you know, prudent view of how it should be managing its affairs, and we will continue to do so. But this is a balanced decision or recommendation to you.
Thank you. Sonia, I'll come back to you, and then I'll come to Ros, and then Christina. I know you're waiting as well. I'll come to you shortly.
Yeah, I was just reading. Thanks, Susan. What I will definitely do is I would take that point back and raise it with Lou. Lou's obviously involved in a lot of discussions at Society of County Treasurers, etc., and just sort of suggest that maybe to her as part of her role working with her other fellow Section 151s to see what we can do about that.
Thank you, Sonia. Ros, I'll bring you in. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm really just going to reiterate a point that I have already made, that whilst it is a very concerning position, not agreeing this across the board equitably for all won't prevent those individual conversations, those individual situations that arise where there will need to be increase in funding, and we won't then have the standard approach to that across the board in the way that we do now, as much as we do now. And I suppose I just cautioning that not agreeing it won't necessarily save the money.
Take the point. Christina, thank you. Morning.
Oh, morning, everyone. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Christina Lewis. I'm the head of early years and childcare. I just wanted to bring us back to the point. It's not just about schools, because I hear a lot about schools all the time. Gemma really helpfully at the start said this is across all education settings. So this will also impact on early years providers who are all supporting all these children, not in specialist units, in their mainstream nurseries long before they cross the doors of a school. So this money also will impact on those children who are being prepared to then come into school. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. As chair of an infant school for now nearly 25 years, I can see how many more children are coming into our reception class with additional needs, which has grown exponentially over those 25 years. So the point you make is a really important one, Christina, that we really value the work that the early years teams do prior to them arriving now in reception, often already with EHCPs in place or in chain. Does anybody else wish to make any points or have any more questions before we go to the vote? Nobody is leaping in. So Jacqueline, I'll hand over to you, please. Could you bring up the first question for us to vote on, please? Anytime now, it should pop up on the screen. Is the voting system playing up this morning, Jacqueline?
I can see it myself.
Can anybody else see it? Because I haven't got it on my screen. Can other members see the vote?
Yeah, yes, Alison.
I can see it.
It's there.
Yeah, it's in the chat.
Okay.
100% yes at the moment.
Screen as well. Okay, I'll go to the chat and pick it up from there. Thank you. Ah, that's unfortunate. I'm doing it on a different laptop today and it says the bot is disabled, so I can't vote today. Oh, well, I'll vote verbally. I'll vote in favour. Okay, so we have had 14 responses, all in favour of that vote then. Thank you. So I'll just read it out because I do normally. Do you agree an increase in the high needs top-up bands at a rate of 3% with a review date in 3 years ahead of academic year 2027-28? That was the preset question. I acknowledge the points people have made about the fact that if there is an opportunity to do so, we will review it in a shorter time frame than that. So we will note that in the minutes as well. Okay. Right, Sue also, oh, right, Sue has now got it as well. Okay. I'll just give it a minute, and Teresa will be capturing all of the comments in the chat as well to make sure that the voting numbers are accurate in the minutes. Okay, we'll move on now. Jacqueline, to the second vote, please. Okay, vote 2 is, do you agree to this increase in funding for SEMH schools? If eligible members could vote now, please. Okay, so 12 people have voted. That's 13 if you include me, Teresa, who can't vote. Typical. So everybody is in favour of that funding increase. So thank you all very much indeed for everybody's contributions to the conversation around this very difficult area. We know, Gemma, you and your team, Sonia and your team, and Ros, everybody, that you're all doing all that you can, and Councillor Reid and others who are lobbying. We're just stuck in this really difficult position in terms of funding, and until that is reviewed, I'm afraid we will continue to have difficult conversations around this table, but we will all continue to do our best to manage the situation to the best that we can to meet the needs of the children in Suffolk. That's the most important bit. Okay, thank you all. That was paper C. Go back to my other computer now. So the next item on the agenda is our, there wasn't any other business, so we can move on from that and move on to the forward agenda. And from that, you can see that our next meeting is on the 4th of July, when we will have the paper that Sonia mentioned about the DSG outturn. We will have more conversation about SEND provision updates. We have that as a standing item. And there will also be information by then about the early years funded entitlements and the hourly rate changes that can be expected for that. So they are our agenda items for our meeting in July, by which time the end of term will be fast approaching you all. So thank you all very much for your contributions to the meeting this morning, and I'll now close the meeting. Thank you all very much.
Thanks,
Alison. Thank you
Thanks,
all.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.